So, good morning, guys. We are currently having a very short space uh, centered into the medium term within 1 to 3 months. And then we're going to have a projection for the end of the year. And one of the main problems that is popping out for Ukraine, and also that's going to become Russia's problem within hopefully the next 6 months. Um, First of all, let's go back to a front uh, assessment. First of all, Kharkov, despite the claims by the Cope State and friends that a alleged front that was open on the east side of the Kharkov oblast. So on the right side, if you're looking from Kharkov through, on the right side of Kharkov, that probably was the DRG, never materialized as a real holding. And so far, we haven't had any kind of footage from the Russian side or footage from the Ukrainian side of any kind of combat. When it comes to Kharkov itself, Volchansky is basically a stalemate with advances on the hospital side by Ukrainian forces getting FPV'd, and advances from the Russian side towards the aggregate and expanding around the aggregate plant, also getting attacked and FPV'd. More or less, the northern center of Volchansky is completely destroyed, and crocodile tears have already appeared with guys saying, "Oh, look at this! Volchansky looks like it has been attacked by a nuke." Of course, they will not tell you that they are hammering that city, just the same as the Russians, by the way, hammering that city with bombs and artillery, just so they can interdict the Russians occupying the area and having a hard presence. The Russians did the same in Krinky. It's just the same approach. The difference, as I said, is that the visual control of the area is huge on the Russian side, and the Ukrainians are not making any headway to properly uproot the Russians from the area in short term. If they have enough time, 2 to 3 months, they could completely clear it out. If the Russians, as I said, decide to just pull back because the advancement that they sought from the Kharkov attack is obtained. In this case, it would be a full control of two salients that are formed right now. One salient is in Pokrovsk towards Zelane, and it takes roughly about currently 80 square kilometers, up to 110 if you see the salient. And the other one is a small salient that just created between New York and Toretsk, which I think has already been abandoned by the Ukrainians. But on the maps, if you go to Kop State, you're going to see a green part between two red clothes. So the goal of the Russian assault in Kharkov right now is working more or less well. Uh, as I had already discussed this with some Nafuit Koptard, the biggest problem for the Russians is that they discovered exactly what the Ukrainians complained about. There were no fortifications, so there was almost nothing to occupy in there. I already mocked the trenches on Kharkov Oblast, around Glibok especially. It was ridiculous. And now that's why a lot of losses on the Russian side are engineering losses. A lot of excavators have been hit because they brought them there to actually dig or finish the trenches that Ukrainians hadn't been able or not willing to do to defend that area. And when it comes to the more important losses, you see that it's very, very balanced. A lot of IVs lost on the Russian side, about 21, about 15 tanks, and about roughly, this is where for last week, we're going to check for this week, but from last week was basically 15 tanks, 21 IVs, fuck ton of trucks, like almost 30, and then like 26 engineering vehicles. On the other side, the Ukrainians are at 13 tanks, over 22 artillery means, some IVs, some vehicles. A lot of the biggest problem for the Russians is also that because of the attacks uh, over the border, there are some losses which before would have been preventable, but now with the Atacam strikes in Belgorod, well, things have taken a turn for the worst when it comes to that. But that doesn't change much in absolute terms, in the sense that it doesn't deprive the guys on the front line from a coverage. It's a couple of books, two pantsirs, and the S400, S300, S400 battery. Now there is claim on another book or S300 battery. We'll see. For now, it's just a very strange obituary, but anyway. So when it comes to Kharkov, it's working for what the Russians need right now, which is attract as much as possible Ukrainian forces. It also is acting as a sponge because most of the bombardments, most of the weapons that Ukrainians do not have in massive numbers, like the hammers, like the GBU-39s and so on, are being thrown towards Volchansk and the area in Kharkov. It's a drain also in availability. As I said, if you're going to have only 10 planes to do all this shit by going full loco on the area of Kharkov, you are not helping out the guys in Pokrovsk or down in southern Donetsk. The bigger problem that we're having right now is something different, is that on the other parts of the front, we got some not so nice movements. As I said, in Yampolivka and Terny, there was a small advancement along the fields and the trenches along the tree lines there. Big deal. Who the fuck cares? Because that has been counterbalanced by attacks in Makivka, pushes in Berestove, and so on and so forth. So therefore, there's not a big problem. It doesn't lead to anything for the Ukrainian side. However, in the Serebranka forest, as I said, and probably you've seen the chosen moments from Azov on what they have done from end of April until more or less 25th of June, which is a systematic advance, clearing up trenches after trenches. It's about 800 meters in advance, which for the force is rather big. The reasons for that I already explained. Very constricted environment. The guys can push forward if they're well organized. And also, one of the biggest mistakes on both sides is that that environment doesn't have interlocking and co-protected areas, and it's mostly infantry fight. So basically, if one of the sides bring enough firepower to collapse one small system, they're gonna advance. And as I said, we speaking about 2 months worth of grind here, which is, as I said, problematic for the Russian presence in the Serebranka forest, but the breakout from there is going to be a problem for the Ukrainians. And the best example of it is Sinkovka. Sinkovka now should have been taken for ages. Unfortunately, the first real attack on Sinkovka was botched by the Russians, leading to unnecessary losses, a recovery of the initiative, a defensive initiative from the Ukrainian side, and therefore every breakout from the forest directly on Sinkovka led to casualties and losses in material and in men. So on that aspect, I hope that the Ukrainians insist on trying to push through Serebrenka forest. and then end up into the flat. Because the forest itself, as I said, limits the heavy equipment you can bring along, but also becomes really a choke point for you. Once you get out there, you're going to have what the Russians had in Sinkovka. You're completely on the flat, and FPVs, artillery, ATGMs, helicopters. It's very difficult for you to do anything. Um, the problem, though, the can you hear me? Okay, I don't know if you hear me. Please, someone can just put a. So basically, the problem is that Srebrenica might be a future breeding ground for the same kind of op that the Ukrainians did in Krinky, only in a way more complicated area because they have a lot of backfield that they can literally fill up. As I said on last space, it's very reminiscent to what happened with Sherwood Forest next to Izium. The difference is that there is no breakout. So if you go there, you're going to be on the flat, and then you have to go on counter slope towards the first band of cities. It ended pretty badly when they did the same thing around Soledar and Abdel-Mahrmud. But once again, that part there is what makes it extremely complicated, extremely problematic for me. But at the same time, for the area on the other bank, the push from Rozdolivka and a couple of distractions and attacks from Russian side towards the Ukrainian positions in Fedorivka with loss of life on the Ukrainian side show exactly what we were aiming at with the people of Team War Criminal, which is basically now that Rozdolivka is taken and the parallel movement towards the valley is also started with a little bit of advance, about 800 to 1 kilometer on that direction. What the Russians are going to probably do is a foothill attack on the plateau that's beyond Rozdolivka, Fedorivka, and then while they're occupying the Ukrainians there to defend this important plateau for the Ukrainians, but not that much for the Russians because basically, as I said, it's like assaulting a huge castle. It would cost you a lot more to try and take it instead of going for the bigger prize, which is advancing towards Siversk from the south and forcing a drain of the troops. So basically, why the Ukrainians are pushing on Serebrenka, the Russians are pushing down towards Siversk from the other bank. This leads to what I said: is that the front up north and north of Donetsk Oblast is actually pretty not stalemated, but you can see that both sides are trying to gain there because there is some breathing space. For the Russians, towards Kharkov, the push to Makiyivka is interesting, but it doesn't lead to getting closer to Kupiansk. It just puts more pressure and helps with the troops that are trying to go through Serebrenka a bit south from the current push from the Russians. But down in Rozdolivka, the push there is a lot more important because, as I said, you are going to get Siversk. Once you get Siversk, you are isolating on another side the sister cities in southwestern Donbass. Because now they're pushing towards Konstantinovka via New York and Toretsk, and then they are also pushing towards Konstantinovka via Chasovia. And if you attack Siversk from the south, this opens up the whole Soledar, what we were expecting from Soledar and Bakhmut, which is blossoming flower, that's happening with the Cheretino, might very well reactivate with these movements in Rozdolivka and by cutting Konstantinovka by the south, coming from New York and Toretsk. And then first two parts of the front, north, Luhansk areas, mostly stalemating, exchanging territory in the advantage of the Russian side, but who the fuck cares at the end? Those are not extremely important because there is a lot of real estate for the Russians. Even if the Ukraine try to push through the Luhansk Oblast, they're gonna get to a backplate pretty fast. Whereas in Donetsk, the situation is completely different, and we are mocking the Ukrainians for that. One of the biggest problems for the moment for Ukrainian side is that despite every single statement and moral boosting bullshit like grabbing whoever they can grab from their prisons uh, and putting them with a rifle on the front, the situation is not changing. And actually, a lot of people are saying, given that the Russians are attacking multiple directions that are not interlocked, this means that the Ukrainians cannot address the same front with the same assets. So basically, they need themselves to demultiply the counterforce. The biggest and best example of this is, of course, what happened in New York and Toretsk. People say, oh my God, it has to do with, once again, the rotation was bad, so on. It is not true. I already made a thread about that before getting martyred. The loot was there since way before the quote unquote rotation. Because the situation was getting bad, not because, once again, some kind of unit shut the bed, simply because the Russians are insisting with blowing everything up with bombs and then, of course, advancing. This doesn't make it easy peasy, it just makes it effective in due, in due time. Um, so you had the claims by multiple Ukrainian forces that Torres and New York are going to shit. Once those fall, you have, as I said, the salient and the kettle that is formed there that is going to be probably already evacuated. There you got a very nice 30 square kilometers at once coming through. Unless Ukrainians want to end up in a hotel, which means maybe 30, 50, 60 people captured, killed, or worse. And on that aspect, I'm saying that thanks very much, Azov, for showing war crimes, and thanks very much to the Ukrainian armed forces, which are encouraging their FPV assholes and their hate droppers to go as much as possible into the gore, because this means, and I don't know if you guys checked the most recent 47th adventures in Novosibirsk Persha, uh, their brand new, very nice presentation of their own Zek force of the Shkval battalion, which was already causing them a lot of problems by being unruly and being impossible to coax into battle, just got captured by the Russians. And the first thing that happened is that you see the Russian servicemen butt striking uh, one of the Ukrainian Zeks. Do not get fooled by that. That is directly linked both from at the ferocity of the fight, but also by the kind of example the Ukrainians are setting, simply by ignoring everything that they cry about when that happens to them, when they get TWK. Of course you're gonna hear them, but they do the same, and they do it without. There is no retinue. It's not like, oh, they're forced to do that. Most of the guys who keep filming and doing all this gore stuff, it's included in the package. They have to do it so as to somehow scare the Russians not to come and fight. What happens usually is that with a cultural shock, like let's say Americans going somewhere like in Iraq, Vietnam, doesn't matter. And then the locals, when they catch one or when they kill one, they savage him, which is what a lot of the things that we saw, notably in the coal burners at the Fallujah bridge from Blackwater. What happened to the helicopter pilots in Mogadishu, and so on and so on. So when those people do that, is to instill fear, because there is this thinking that the other side is wussy, so they cannot take that gore, that image, and everything. That's actually maybe true, maybe not true, but the reality is that you are not fighting against Pindos, you are fighting against yourself. As much as the Ukrainians hate to say it, their Zeks and the Russian Zeks, you're gonna see that just the same. Their mobs and the Russian mobs, there are gonna be very little difference on the social background and so forth. Even the losses that they pretend the Russians to have a fuck ton of losses, but they got nothing. Once you start looking through it, the known confirmed losses are extremely close, maybe if not the same. The problem with the Ukrainians uh, in their PR war against the Russians is that they think they are facing the Americans or some kind of enemy is going to be frightened. However, they are seeing the Russians now for 30 months attack head on. It's not about midways, it's about not being scared of the attack itself. And now we are into the FPV land for almost a year, over a year actually. And the Russians are still there. They are trying to find a solution, shotguns, electronic warfare, whatever. But they're still coming. They're still coming. And so the whole idea of gore and all this shit, it's stupid. I personally think it's counterproductive because it leads to what we're seeing a bit more from the Russian side, which is openly taking revenge on whatever Ukraine they're going to find. And on the other side, given how the Russians hit harder uh, pound per pound, this leads to Ukrainian guys disappearing, like a whole fucking headquarters we don't know until they say us, and then they blame the leadership. 59th had the same. The problem with the Zek on the 47th. Um, the fact that the Shevchuk is asking its brigade not to pick up the Zeks that have been lost, that could be justified because he maybe doesn't look at them as being human beings. Who the fuck cares at the end? It's bigger against bigger violence. It's all fine. But the logic of trying to frighten the Russians, instill some kind of fear into them by showing gore, I'm like, where does it even come from? Because okay, you know, you're gonna show extreme gore of one, two, five guys. It will not change the fact that one UMPK is gonna raise 10 guys of yours. And it wouldn't matter because the Russians, if we wanted gore, the Russians did it very early. Attack on Nikolaev barracks, over 200 bodies were in pieces. Ukrainians were grabbing their own guys, uh, finger toe by finger toe, and it didn't change anything. Did the Ukrainians stop fighting, doing bullshit, and being nasty assholes? No. So this whole principle of showing gore, to me, it has nothing to do with PR anymore, or at least it's very misguided PR. It goes to the point when the Ukrainian public and the Ukrainian military right now is just a fucking bunch of psychopaths. And as such, the problem, I'm not speaking about the leadership. Leadership can be even worse or better, it doesn't matter. But the guys, especially the drone operators, the ISR operators, the guys who call the shots on what to do against the Russians generally. I'm not speaking while in the offense. Drone attack when you're trying to assault positions. I'm not gonna say it's fine because they are Russians, but it's logical. It's war. But when you see some guy already giving up on life, he's gonna die, and you drop a bomb and suddenly half of his body is completely eviscerated and his heart is popping out and you see the heart still pumping and you stay there filming for 20, 30, 40 seconds. This tells a lot more, not about your enemy, but yourself, what you have become. And I think this is why Ukraine is losing the war. They are too far gone. And the people who come to fight on their side, Mobiks, um, Zeks, anyone who isn't a ideological asshole, I think has a huge problem getting over that. mentally he gets scarred within 2 to 3 weeks. And of course, it's logical. It's combat. It's not fun. It's absolutely awful. And I said in another post, it's irreversible. You have to go with the program. But if your program is basically being a garbage human being, at some point, the reflection is, as Nietzsche said, when you bend over and see your reflection and you see the monster in there, that's what it is. And that's how a lot of these people now are going to these extremes for quote unquote PR, but the reality is also showing a kind of impotence by being extremely violent and definitive for the people they can reach, because they know their time is going to come. If not theirs, because this is also a thing with drone operators, they are far more away than the guys at the zero line or the near abroad or the guys who are going to be doing the speedy runs, the last mile logistics. And this is why the space today is named one step forward, two steps back. The use of FPVs tactically and even strategically at some point is extremely important, and the Ukrainians are replacing a huge absence of artillery rounds with them and also other assets. The problem is that that doesn't stop a UMPK from raising your fucking battalion headquarters. Doesn't stop a Iskander from blowing up your trains. Doesn't stop an Iskander from literally leveling whatever you have as air defense. That doesn't stop an Iskander from raising 7 jets at once. And this attempt at equalizing by violence and gore is unfortunately what I said since the beginning of this war. We are going back to how jihadis were doing this, how Daesh was doing this. So it's the weaker side who's trying to impose some kind of mental and strain, a psychological burden, violence and horror. The problem with it is that on both sides it's the same people. And I know we're not supposed to say that Kikirs are the same as Muscats, but the reality is that they're just the same. Same bullshit, same mistakes, same stubbornness. The differences are Moscal is a world player, so it has a lot more assets. It can change the game in a completely different manner than Kikils. But deep down inside, it's just the same people. That you like it or not, guys. This is still my thinking that there is not much difference. Just like in the Balkans, okay, we might have large differences in language from people to people, Greeks, Albanians, Slavs, but the Slavs themselves, including some areas where the Albanians are the majority, they were fucking sharing the same culture for so long. It's just basically the same kind of mixing bowl. For Ukrainian and Russians, it's even worse because I think it's the same. It's same, especially Western Russia with Ukraine. Not that much of a difference, except from the bogus hubris from Moscow, Kiev, whatever. But then, once you see this and you don't understand what Ukrainians are doing, it I do understand why, because as I said, for me, they are going back to the mentality they had in the beginning of the war, when in their mind the war was lost. The fact that it turned the way it turned was a surprise for everyone, but for them, the people who fought the war then, they were fighting without thinking for tomorrow, because for them it was lost. It was now or never. Now we're getting to this logic, and that's why you're seeing the Russians advance so methodically, uh, that the Ukrainians now are thinking, wait, this war is advancing, but still limited, because for the Russians, clearly the logic is attracting the Ukrainians until they get the oblast, most of the oblast that they want, maybe threaten a bit Dnipropetrovsk in order for, once they're going to sit at the table, the Ukrainians are going to be more amenable to shut the fuck up and accept territorial concessions. Attack a little bit on Kharkov because, it's always a nice threat as well. And then maybe change. I still have a piece of Kharkov. Give me back my Kherson Oblast beyond the Dnieper. Although I think that is a mistake because it's very difficult to defend, even from a cold line. So even if there is some kind of peace and you rebuild the bridges and so on and so forth, for me it's still a very big problem. So if you want to get the other side of Kherson, you will have to go for Nikolaev anyway. I mean, it's the same plan in 2022, but you're not going to Kiev. You're just putting everything on south. Um, as for Dnipropetrovsk, of course, the logic is clear with the reactivation of the Velika Novosilka front with the taking of Staromayorsk and Urozhanye, which technically was already taken 3 weeks ago, just like they had to finish it now. You see that they're going to advance towards Uspensivka, and they're going to advance toward the corner of the northwestern corner of the Donetsk Oblast, on the area which is just next to Pokrovsk, advancing towards Dnipropetrovsk. That advance is going to be facilitated because the road network for the Ukrainians is going to become worse from there on. If they lose Pokrovsk, then they need to work from Pavlograd, but it's already 110 kilometers away. And if they need to avoid Pokrovsk to go to still supply Siversk or Slovyansk or whatever, the whole road, and this is the point I'm going to make a bit later, the whole road from Pavlograd towards sister cities is going, if the front moves the way it's moving right now, is going to be completely exposed in Defilad to the Russian lines. They're going to be not further than 10, 12 kilometers, which is FPV territory. And this is going to cost the Ukrainians a lot more in logistics if nothing changes. And that's why I said that's where things are going to get a lot worse. Right now, Russians are at 60 kilometers from Moskovsk. Once you're at Moskovsk, Pokrovsk itself is completely fucked. You cannot do anything because the two highways that you need to take, the one going towards Ugledar, the one going towards Konstantinovka, are going to be occupied. Russians are already attacking shit in Novozelane. Basically, this means that Ukrainians are probably in Mezhova, and Novosibirsk pressure has been lost. They have made advances towards progress. I'm going to put a small. I'm going to put a small picture here of the three advances that currently are problematic for the Ukrainians, because once they cross there, so we got Vozdvizhenia, we got Lozovatke, and then you got the advance towards progress. It's on the thread. Once you get the situation there, I put it on the nitrogen, guys. Once you got the situation being full there, they are on the plateau of Gelane. And once you are on the plateau of Gelane, you're going to have all the heights coming from Selidovo, coming from Pokrovsk. And this is the biggest problem for Mocheletino right now. Russians did exactly what we at Timor Criminals said they were going to do, is they kept the plateau from Mocheletino, so all the heights from Mocheletino towards Nova Alexandrivka, towards Progress and so on. But at the same time, they did a crouching tiger attack, completely boxed the Ukrainians towards the Karlivka reservoir. They pushed them as far as possible, and now they are reaping the gains, because for the Ukrainians to be staying, as I said, in a smaller place, uh, simply meant death. There is nothing else that expects them. And that's what happened. If you see on the triangle of death in Karlivka, you're going to have at least 8 to 9 vehicles destroyed. And just behind the choke point in Karlivka, you have another 4 or 5 destroyed. But this is on a defensive posture. Ukrainians losing that much for such a small place is huge. It's just the same what's happening in Kharkov, as I said. When the terms of exchange in Kharkov between Russians and Ukrainians are extremely bad for the Ukrainians, because contrary to what they were doing in Avdiivka, where the Russians literally threw the kitchen sink at them, in Kharkov, it's not like that. Tank losses the same artillery losses, incomparable. The Ukrainians are over 20. Okay, you have mobility losses on the Russian side with IIVs and trucks, of course. But on the other side, the Ukrainians are losing also pickups, which are their main transport capability in the area. And plus a fact on artillery. I'm using NASA numbers, but the real numbers, if you go to LA and see the episodes, are double in artillery at least, which is where we're going for Pokrovsk, Cheretino, and the advance to Argelane. The Ukrainians, for some reason, are being absolutely stupid. Instead of either delivering a decisive battle to a choke point, which they were able to do for so long in Stepove, just outside Avdiivka, mostly because they dare to risk, and it cost them extremely much, because without FPVs they would have been rolled over in end of December. But the reality itself brings us to the same situation that we have always with Ukrainians. They're going to defend Delento for a little while, and then it's just a degeneracy of their defense capabilities. And that's what we hear from everyone. Right now, the Russians are hitting 15 kilometers towards Selidovo from the Ocheretino front. And the videos that we've seen is that beyond the 6 kilometer band, when you have this post immediate line of contact, Russian drones have almost no interference, which is going to be an absolute disaster. And we've heard that multiple times. If you go to Officer Plus, he said they lost like 8 pickups a week ago. Now, on another post that he did, he literally showed exactly where he was traveling and what was the whole resupply road. Of course, Russians know this, but for every time we hear that the Russians need to do something about OPSEC, and then you got this retard doing more than giving us OPSEC, this is basically justifying what we were saying for so long. Shows that, as I said, Ukrainians are in a very bad situation. And unlike what it was between October and January, October 23, January 24, where they had this absolute cope about we're destroying the Russians, 300 tanks, artillery, this and that. Now, we are into a situation where they cannot hide it, and it makes the whole conduct of the war questionable. Officer Plus complained about Shevchuk in the 59th. Some other guys complained about the leadership in the 47th. Then we have the complaints about the 116th and the 151st that are not being given proper indication what to do. 116th was accused of leaving the front around New York and Torres. I mean, we had all these small things that we didn't saw for so long, except from Butuzov. Butuzov, by the way, is extremely silent. Um, Basically, he got a kind of Moors treatment. Unfortunately, he's still alive, the asshole. But we are with this logic where the Ukrainians now are there. They're at that point where it doesn't matter. Then you have Bezuglaya that literally got kicked out of the defense commission at the Rada and added in Tmiot Tveretz yesterday, because she literally said the way the war is going seems like Sierski doesn't want to win the war. He wants to capitulate as soon as possible and keep the positions that we have now, which for Ukraine in absolute terms, on some areas, Siversk area, Slavyansk, uh, sister cities, Pokrovsk, and so on, is pretty advantageous, because you're going to stop the Russians on the best positions that they are going to get right now. So this whole situation on the Ukrainian side, in a certain sense, is also matched by a lot of bollocks on the Russian side. We had these commentators that were saying, "Oh, we should do 155 because 152 is a dead end technologically." A lot of bullshit that Andrew the pedo was talking about. Then we got other people who complain about, oh, look how industrious the piggers are, because they're using Yak 52 to shoot down our drones. And I'm like, oh my God, what the? Just shut the fuck up, guys. And the very next day, when David Axe posted his bullshit about, yeah, people are complaining that maybe would like the Yak 52 to be destroyed, it was hit. Russians, their main issue is a kind of delay in almost everything they do. But once it's there, we see the results, and we see them for people who are looking at this war, the way it's happening. And this is not trying to invent some kind of Russia as a copy paste of how America would fight its war, because nothing is the same. Capabilities, um, the enemy, the way the enemy supplied, trained, helped, backed. I mean, who gave the Taliban MiG 29s or whatever? Who gave the Taliban Iskanders, or if not Iskanders, Tochkas? Like, imagine where we're going with this. The comparisons between the two are clearly set up into a proxy war scheme that has nothing to do with what the Americans have done since at least Vietnam. So, trying to shame the Russian military apparatus is easy because there are a lot of bullshit going on. But not understanding the war, how it was, how it's going, how it will be later on, is a grave mistake. And you can see it in how the Ukrainians are begging. Back to a certain time was, we should strike Russian airfields. I'm like, with what? Everything that you're going to be given from the US, and given how the Russians are still having a very formidable air defense, the weapons you're going to have are not going to fire longer than Storm Shadows. You're going to be at the same distance. Unless, of course, you give them Tomahawk, but that would mean nukes on Ukraine anyway. And the Americans know that there's not a problem. They know that when it goes to those strategically altering weapons, they're going to get it back. It's not going to be fun. It's not going to be nice for anyone in Europe. And I think that at some point, something will need to happen to stop that from happening. So basically, either the Americans go all in and say, okay, the Russians will not dare, but with a question mark that if they dare, then what? Or we are going to what I said, which is the strategy we're seeing right now because of what happened to Trump and his choice as vice president, which in a certain sense, for me, is not going to change that much. It's true that he fucking hates the guts of Ukraine for whatever reason, but at the end, most of the contracts that have already been passed by Brandon, they're gonna still be executed. The only difference might be that if the war is going to an end because Trump wants this to stop immediately because it's making it extremely complicated for the US to actually react to what's going on economically between China, Europe, and the US, then maybe the weapons are not going to be sent, or they're going to be sent as a token force for the new Ukrainian army, which probably after, if nothing changes, of course, we never know what's going to happen. But if nothing changes, they stay on the same course, the Ukrainian army is going to be roughly 120,000 people, all in with fleet, aviation, everything, which is one third of its real size at the time of the war. And some concessions, if once again the war keeps going like this, might well be losing one or two air bases and maybe a demilitarization of whole oblast like Nikolaev, Dnipropetrovsk, and probably Chernigov and Sumy. So there is something, there is a scare. You can see it. Everybody's panicking on NAFO side. Americans themselves are like, oh my god, what the fuck is going on? The Ukrainians, I mean, Zelia called Trump a loser 2 weeks before the guy went all Rocky Balboa. This is the whole fucking problem right now. Um, the political aspect was always the most fragile aspect for the Ukrainians, because they are dependent on someone else. Europe, America, other people, Turkey in the case of the grain deal, and so on and so forth. So it was always the political side was going to be the most risky for them, and that's why sometimes all the fucking shenanigans he was doing, Zelia, were inconducive to him getting more help. And of course, Ukrainian military mistakes compounded everything into being worse. But in the case that we're seeing right now, where Ukraine are still fucking going after this myth of attrition is going to kill Russia, I'm like, it makes no sense. Because attrition is going to kill Russia if the Russians do not stop their offensive. I firmly believe that after a certain point, so if Konstantinovka is taken, Drushkovka is under threat, Pokrovsk is under threat, they got one highway between Pokrovsk and Konstantinovka, and they are in between that highway and the second highway between Pokrovsk and Slovyansk. Then what? And as I said, if this highway that's going to go above Pokrovsk towards the sister cities will be under fire control by the Russians, at least under threat by FPVs. What do you think is going to happen? Other problems are the Germans suddenly were extremely kind and gave 39 panzers. Of course, it was bullshit right off the start because it's like 10 Leopard 1s and a bunch of Marders along with engineering vehicles. But this shows exactly where we are at. Remember, last year, the counter was equipped, or was supposed to be equipped, by a fuck ton of tanks. A lot of them were still Warpack tanks. Most of them from Poland, some of them from Czech Republic with financing from the US and Netherlands, and then some other stuff that they found left and right, probably from Bulgaria. But you still had 250 tanks for the counter, plus what they had already themselves, because there was a bunch of TCV-2 AMTs, T-64s, Ober 17s, Ober 22s, whatever. These tanks are not there, and despite everything that the Russians have been losing, most of these tanks are being disabled or destroyed on the field, and they recover them. Most of the ground where these tanks have been lost is under Russian control. And that includes also the Gebrams, the Leopards, the Bradleys, and so on. So the Ukrainians, when it comes to pure capture, are not in 2022 when they literally grabbed a couple of tank armies in running order. That you believe it or not, it doesn't matter. I'm just saying what we were seeing. But now we are into this absolutely mind-blowing logic that somehow Ukrainians need to prepare for a counter, but there is nobody announcing anything. And yes, maybe you're gonna have some kind of swap with Poles giving their M1A1 FEPs to the Ukrainians, then some trickle down of Leopard 2s, probably about 50 or 60 extra. 10 were already apparently sent by Spain. Maybe some extra tanks from some other country, potentially Australia. But at the end of the day, it's the Warpack tanks that are missing. And people think that, oh my god, Ukraine is still refurbishing. By the love of God, as I already showed last year and this year, early this year, you got 65 full transmissions for T-72s being shipped by from Kharkov to the front line in the whole fucking year. 65 tanks, therefore, that can be overhauled. And for T-64s is worse because the Ukrainians were the only nation to have full manufacturing process. Maybe some guys in Central Asia might afford them something, maybe some kind of swap as well. We've seen other people transform their tanks. I'm thinking about the Czechs, but it would necessitate a full swap and a complete change of the engine deck. So all these things are not there. What is there, what is true, is armored cars, some wraps, um, some IFVs. If the logic is therefore to accumulate whatever the Ukrainians have now, plus extra IFVs, so another mechanized force, and then another motorized force with the MRAPs, with the senators, with whatever you want, we are still halfway to have something more decent than last year. So basically, as I said, you would need 60 to 80,000 people, but that would require already over the 320 tanks you had last year. So you're going to be at 500, for not saying 600. By the Indian transfer ammunition, thanks Spain for that, we know that they ship about 50,000 rounds. They shipped about 50,000 rounds in May. Those 50,000 rounds, if you drop them down to 25, because you know the Soviet tanks will have a certain complement. It's typically 22 explosive rounds, but given that they are mostly fighting against dugout positions, they're going to be to 25. Um, well, 25 per load with 50,000. How much are you going to be? 2,000 loads, right? Divide by 4 because you need the resources to be able to sustain a stockpile. You have more or less bought ammunition for 500 tanks that are rolling non-stop. 500 tanks plus 3 loads as reserves, and you are to 2,000 loads per tank complement. So the problem that we're having here is that we can more or less deduct how much Ukrainians have. And by looking also what they're losing as tanks, what they're losing as artillery, and what they're losing as multiple rocket launchers, including HIMARS. Germans sent 3 new M270/Mars for reasons that we ignore. We don't ignore, of course, the footage is telling. But you're going to this logic where the only expense that the Ukraine is going to have in short to medium term is going to be their air force and the infantry, if it happens. By having these two assets changing for you in the current logic, means that first they're going to ham their defenses. So that's why we're seeing now in Novosibirsk Persha with the Zegs getting through. But the Zegs themselves are not such a big pool because, as I already said before, the prison incarcerated population on Ukrainian side is roughly 45,000. On pre-trial, so people who are not trialed yet, who cannot legally be sent to fight, although in Russia it was done in a couple of cases, you are going down to maybe 30,000 people you can use. You have about 4,000 women, you're down to 25, 30,000, of which by law a certain part cannot be taken because of psychological problems, the gravity of their crimes, and the time they have to do. Because allegedly, if the prisoners are on their last 2 or 3 years. So even that potential resource is going to be limited to 15 to 20,000. That's what they said. They hope to get 20,000 from the ZEC contracts. But these 20,000, you will need to use them a bit like the Russians use them, or a bit like Wagner used them, which is expendables. And to me, as I said, it should be logical to do that. And even if you lose the whole bunch, the whole 20,000, at the end, it will not change that much the situation, but it will probably help to stymie the Russian advances over the whole front. But then you have a situation that what happened to the 47th, and you have the situation that is happening right now with 59th, when these people are just grabbed and thrown into the cauldron, just to be able to, either be a speed bump or stop the Russians from going forward. But you cannot rely on these guys for offensive actions if you're Ukrainian. I'm going to tell you why. That's the only thing you have right now that you can have at a certain level. So these guys are going to just slam into a MRAP, slam into a senator, slam into whatever shitbox you have, pull them at the front, and then get them killed. Hopefully they're going to kill as many as they die in there, which is how the Ukrainians see the Russian employment of the ZEX. And in a certain sense, it's fine. Who the fuck cares? Like, it's their problem. But by using this means that your most finite resource, but most expendable one as well, is going to be used just to dampen the Russian offensive. Whereas they would be more interesting as your own offensive. So the mistake here, as I said, that's why one step forward, two step back. The good idea to use Zex, because like it's logical. These guys are unfortunately the fringe of your society and usually are not the brightest. They can be used in a certain sense to pay their own debt to the society in question by giving their lives and making the most extreme sacrifice. But if you use them as on a defense, you're gonna have what happened to the 47th, which is these people were already in jail. They may be not free in jail, but they were quote unquote safe in the sense that they had a logic to be freed at some point. If you're at the trenches on a defensive position, you cannot go back, you cannot go forward, and your life can end every single day. The pressure put on these people, I think, is not conducive to a high quality unit. I may be wrong, but generally speaking, and what we're seeing for Nostalgica Persia, it's the most basic truth. Actually, if you see also what the 47th showed as footage, these people were bunching up while trying to quote unquote assault some Russian trench. So there we go. We everything that we are speaking about, these guys are not properly trained. These guys maybe shouldn't be used for a delay action or a kind of elastic defense. There's going to be a blowback onto them. And the worst part of it is that the Russians are not slowing down either, probably with the so-called lag effect that you mobilize in June, but the results are starting to be felt in August. Probably, maybe, we'll see. But right now, a good idea, belated good idea on the Ukrainian side, is being improperly used, and due to the fact that they do not have as much as the Russians to use as meat, that resource is going to be extremely finite very soon. And if they start taking 10 casualties per day on the Zek force, within a month, they're going to be at 300. The first batch was supposed to be 3,000. If you start losing 10% each month by the virtue of reduced ability to function, because you lose, when you're at 100, you lose 10%, it's not a problem. Then you're going to lose another 10%, you are 20% less, but 80% is still doable, you can still cover. But once you start being at 70, 60%, then it gets extremely complicated, and the other side is going to get you. And that's how actually the Russians literally crumbled in 2022, by thinking and not replacing losses on due time and so on and so forth. So for the Ukrainian side, employing these guys that could be better employed on head-on assaults later on defense, is a wastage. And also, the most important part is that Ukrainians still keep going with these completely unstrategic operations in order to show success. That was with Krinky, it's happening now with Serebranka, it happened with Yampolivka and Terni. They did the same bullshit with Bahmut, with Soledar. It seems to me that we are the Ukrainian military leadership has no other gear for the moment. Maybe they're going to have it in 2025. Maybe the F-16s are going to help have this other gear. Although, as I said, I do not see it happening for the most important part, because the F-16 would need to come close enough to get swacked. On the other side, the Russians avoided it. Have been avoided under 50 kilometers firing, just because they know what happens. And the footage that we had, or the clip from Fighter Bomber, about how one Su-34 evaded 3 Patriot missiles fired over 80 kilometers from there, is testament to that. One thing that Ukrainians still cannot avoid is getting shot long range, not by ground-based air defense, but by Russian jets. And on that aspect, the F-16 is not going to change much. In a certain sense, it's even maybe bound to cause more problems, that plane being single engine and being also a smaller pocket fighter. Maybe shrapnel is going to affect the F-16 a bit more differently than a MiG-29 or Su-27. So we'll still have to see what is going to be the impact of the F-16. But generally speaking, as I said, there are two main concerns for the Ukrainians right now: is losing huge swaths of land around the Donetsk Oblast, quote unquote, for free. As I said, there is a salient that has been formed between Torsk and New York. There is another salient that is still for Pokrovsk, and then down there in Krasnogorivka. That's almost 120 square kilometers. These are small pieces of land. It's not like we're not speaking huge advances. But as I said, given the Ukrainian mentality of every square kilometer counts, the Ukrainians themselves are going to know that losing that much real estate is going to cost them dearly later on. So the biggest problem I'm having right now is, what's the end game for the Ukrainian military? As I spoke about, when it comes to the lower echelon, lower level, the operative level, they are encouraging, obviously, a conduct that is not going to be conducive of survival after the hostilities are going to be over. And I fully understand that the Ukrainians are never going to give up quote unquote war criminals to the Russians. But that also means that a lot of these people, after it's said and done, they will need to hide. Um, and on another side, let's not forget the biggest problem for the Ukrainians is that despite the ICC warrants for Putin and Gerasimov, Shoigu, and everyone else, nothing's going to happen to these people. Unless something dramatic happens, of course. But them, the 20-year FPV who kills hundreds of Russians, Madyar, Pritula, all these fuckers, they have been publicly showing what they did. And we're not speaking, okay, like Poroshenko, who is showing, I did this much, these are all the shit I bought, and Smert Vorogam, all that shit. That's fine, actually. And in a certain sense, it's very funny because Poroshenko is showing up as being extremely dignified in his quote unquote resistance, probably because the thought was, Zelia fucked up, I'm gonna recover and probably re-become president. But generally, the Ukrainian armed forces are literally leaving the leash on the dogs and letting them do things that you can ask the Americans if you want, if they think this is conducive to a proper war propaganda, showing gore, showing atrocities. And it doesn't matter, as I said, during an assault, fine, it's war. After it, when you see these guys dying, and as I said, it's not even a mercy kill because of what happens after it. And this is why I named the space today one step forward, two steps back, because my biggest concern right now is that the Ukrainian armed forces are turning into the exact thing the Russians were in 2022. They are becoming more and more dysfunctional, not because, once again, not because generals are fighting against each other or whatever, or there is no shortage of manpower, but because the order on how to fight this war is going sideways. Uh, you got a propaganda center of one brigade that has no problem showing war crimes and actually recruiting people through them. Of course, I'm speaking about the trash brigade. Very concerning that it's not just drones, as I said, it's a lot of other things. And it also is how they think about it. Not that the Russians do not think the same. This is another problem, is that the sentiment between the two sides wasn't like this in 2022. It changed 2023, but now I'm pretty sure that the moment the war stops, we are going to have a flurry of videos from the Russians where they actually commit war crimes, but simply they do not show them until. And on that aspect, Mishalkov said it. Oh, trust us. There is a lot more out there than one guy getting his head sawed and stuff like that. It's just that they're not showing them because of what it entails. I've always been against that. I think that if the other side wants barbarity, You should give it to them. But at the same time, as I said, you have to fulfill a task. You cannot have a bunch of psychopaths being in your military. There is a kind of order. Of course, a lot of these people are going to be scarred for life. I have no fucking doubts about that. I really think that half of the guys, especially the mobilized, are going to have huge problems going forward on both sides. But I do not see the Russians, or at least maybe it's me, maybe you can somehow find it differently. I don't see the Russians pushing for, and of course there are some units. Somali did that. Vogue 25 did that. Um, Other people before were extremely gore. But generally, even when they show these hate drops, you can see that on the Russian hate drops, sometimes and a lot of times, even in plain daylight, they use the thermals because you can completely imagine what happens to a body when it gets widespread on the thermal. So you see atrocities. You see also Ukrainians that are defenseless getting dropped. But everything is done to show the result, not to disgrace the bodies of the fallen at the same level as the Ukrainians. And in a certain sense, it would be even counterproductive, not for the Russians, for the Ukrainians, to see that what they're doing, the Russians are doing to them as well. But once again, it's clear who has more control over the troops than the other side. And this is the last thing I was going to say. Um, a lot of talking heads on the Russian side got silenced. You still have two majors, you still have Romanov, but most of the times now it's things that we know are missing. You don't have bullshit like Kremlin secrets or TWK or GPU that literally has become a rag now. Dossier Spiona that, as I said, finally went into full propaganda. All this shit from Ukrainian CIPSO or from self-hating Russians, you don't find that anymore in Russia. And in a certain sense, it's not always good. That's why you need to go to technical telegrams like for UAVs and stuff like that, because those people don't lie given the technical aspect, the factual aspect of what they're doing. And as I said, if you go to read Solovyov or if you go and watch Slatkov, you are into this logic where one day we fire 100 rounds and they fire one, and the very next week, oh my god, it's so bad. For one of ours, seven of theirs are coming, and you're like, how the fuck did that change? Especially now that we know how much the Czechs gave ammunition wise, which is 50,000 in June, 50,000 gonna be in July, 50,000 in August, and then from September to December, you're gonna be between 80 and 100,000. So in average, roughly 70,000 a month in average. Everyone was crying about the artillery disparity being 1 to 7, 1 to 10, 1 to 5. But if it's 1 to 5 and only 70,000 rounds per month in average, of course, uh, bring parity, this is mathematically not possible. Plus, there are other problems. I said the barrel problems, equipment problems, discipline problems, and also one thing that is more and more apparent: Ukrainians are running out of luck. When it comes to artillery, there has been a huge advantage on Russian side in counter battery. They are finding them. As simple as that. They are finding them. And so, more or less, what's going to happen, once again, if there is no major influx of means and assets on the Ukrainian side, and I'm not speaking about meat waves, is going to degenerate slowly up to a point when we are going to be not even phased that the Russians are assaulting Pokrovsk. But if the Russians are there, it's game over. They will have the Donbass. The whole point of this war at the end, and what Zelensky said, they started in Donbass, it's going to end in Donbass. It's true, but you're losing it. And once you lose it, the main political point of this war is gone. So if you want to attack more, the Russians are just going to make the next proposal worse. And I perfectly understand why there is this, we're going to negotiate and this and that. That's not going to happen. More recently, you had the Kiev Institute of Sociological Sciences showing that it's almost half of Ukrainians that want to start the negotiations. But at the same time, they don't want to lose territory, and they don't want to agree with Putin's quote-unquote ultimatum. And I agree. Once again, one step forward, we want to negotiate. But we don't want to negotiate what the other peoples want. Two steps back. Then what are you going to negotiate? Especially as I said, for Russia, except for the rather large chunk of Kherson that's beyond the Dnieper, a little bit of Zaporozhye, that, in my opinion, for the moment are completely out of reach. For Russia, it's 20 something percent of Zaporozhye, a bit like 40% of Donetsk, and a speck of Lugansk that is still not there. For Russia, getting the Donetsk Oblast, so basically most of the Donbass, is a doable goal within 6 to 8 months. The conditions will be there that Ukraine will have to decide if they want to stay or not in Donetsk Oblast. So I don't see the point of a negotiation over the 4 oblasts. Once again, one step forward, 2 steps back. And then what are you going to negotiate with Russia? Things that they already have? Crimea? Fine. Then what? Russia already knows that Crimea is not going to be lost in this war, unless, of course, as I said, there is some apocalyptic event that happens. What? Kherson, Zaporozhye, as it was described that they would leave them back to this famous quote-unquote plan in the US? As I said, it makes no sense because the whole point of Crimea is to have a land corridor towards Donetsk and Lugansk. On top of it, as it stands right now, Zaporozhye is the most defensible place for the Russians. So why would they start by having the Ukrainians 20 kilometers from Crimea and literally turning the whole north of the Crimean Peninsula into a HIMARS polygon? Makes no sense. It makes strictly no sense. There is no logic there. And of course Ukrainians know this. So whoever cooked that plan, it was dead on arrival. But now the other part is what the Russians want. And in this case, Monkey will have to reply to that. And it's true that he gave something. He said, like, 4 oblasts, army reduction, no NATO, whatever you want to do with the EU, which I find still problematic, but whatever. And some demilitarized areas, probably Kharkov, probably Nikolaev, probably a large band of Dnipropetrovsk. And in my opinion, he's not going to have, he knows that what is beyond the Dnieper is going to be extremely complicated for him to have them and have the Ukrainians agree to the loss of those lands, because there are strategically very ill positioned for the Russians. Now, if the Russians had the full um, Oblast of Zaporozhye, that's something else. And that is probably what frightens the Ukrainians the most, because when you see how it is on the map, Zaporozhye and Donetsk Oblast form a natural salient with the Dnipropetrovsk Oblast. So basically, it's clear that within 5 to 10 to 15 years, Russia is going to claim Dnipropetrovsk. So that too is a huge problem for the Ukrainians. They understand that once they give those four oblasts, it's over for Dnipropetrovsk, because it would be just a matter of pretext. Russians are going to say, "Oh, see, terrorist activity on the border." They would have better positions. They would have still more troops and equipment to send within 6 to 8 months. Not that it would take 6 to 8 months to capture the whole of Dnipropetrovsk, but it's going to be putting the Ukrainians in such a bad place, especially if they can keep going along the Dnieper, that it makes no sense for the Ukrainians strategically to accept this plan. On top of it, if the Russians get Dnipropetrovsk Oblast, then Kharkov is itself in another salient with 120 kilometers from the boundaries of Dnipropetrovsk Oblast to the Russian border. This would make any kind of approach from um, Ukrainian fighter jets impossible if they want to protect beyond the Osko line, because they would be too close from the Russian border up north and too close from the Dnieper. So, as I said, strategically, Ukrainians cannot agree to the four blasts. They're gonna make made to agree. That's true. But then we are going to this step-by-step typical Russian salami tactics, which is going to end, in my opinion, by just taking over most of what is on the eastern bank of the Dnieper within 2 to 3 decades. It depends how badly the Ukrainians are going to screw the putsch in the upcoming year and a half. And if it's indeed how it happens, and once again, it's not like a huge prediction. It's pretty logical. Just look at the map. Once you get both Zapo and Donetsk, you got a chunk of Dnipropetrovsk Oblast that is out like a sore thumb there. And it's pretty easy to understand what's going to happen. On top of it, by doing so, you also neutralize the rail system towards Kharkov. So it makes completely sense for the Russians to have views on Dnipropetrovsk as soon as possible. I'm not even talking about the industries. I'm not even talking about the fact that Dnipropetrovsk is a very rich oblast. No, I'm just saying militarily, look at the map. You can see clearly where it's going. And nobody would give a fuck about Kherson City. And nobody would give a fuck about a small speck of Zaporozhye, which is the other side of Zaporozhye city that's beyond the Dnieper. It would be fine. 23% of Kherson Oblast that is literally flat and absolutely untaggable against Dnipropetrovsk Oblast, it's a no-brainer. Of course, there are people who are still thinking about Odessa, about seizing the whole Black Sea coast from Ukraine. It's true. It's true also that Monke said Odessa is a Russian city. But right now, how the war is going, the capabilities and the strategic outlet that is Russia, Odessa is going to have to wait for a long while. So there we go. Ukrainians are going back to their barbaric ways to cope, I think, for the way it's going on the ground. At the same time, they are still going with this logic of a W is a W, which means that they're gonna go and seek a W in areas where they shouldn't. This is exactly what they did at the counter. The counter didn't start in Zaporozhye, it started in fucking Bakhmut. And as everybody on the Ukrainian side has been saying, that ground up to 30% of the forces. Syrskyi literally kneecapped the whole counter. I do not believe that. I think that the whole plan was shared between Zalupichka and Syrskyi, but simply they didn't have enough men. They didn't expect the Russians to be that proficient, and they absolutely failed when it came to counter battery fire, despite all the artillery assets that they took out. It was just not enough that they could take out. So that's it, guys, for the moment. It was just more of a reminder of where we're going. It was also half of July. We are over 2 months into the Kharkov surprise. Russians, for the moment, are going nowhere, and this is both good and bad. Good because Ukrainians are unable to put them out of their misery over there, but bad because they're, when you stay put, at some point you're just gonna get thinned. So it's either backwards or forward, but staying at the same place, you're just gonna get squashed long term. But also, this also shows the limitations of the Ukrainian army, both in manpower, equipment, but also thought. One of the things that they should have done is go all for it, a bit like Teplinsky did for Krinky. If you keep the Russians coming there, despite the quote-unquote losses you inflict on them, when you go to the spreadsheet, the kind of losses that you're having, the quality of losses that you're having, is not what you should be proud of. Losing almost as much tanks as them, losing a fuck ton of artillery means, whereas you are complaining that you don't have enough ammunition and enough tubes, is a no-brainer to understand why this is stalling on both sides, by the way. So yeah, uh, that was it, guys. If you want to intervene, I'm gonna be short this time. If not, well, thank you very much for listening, and to the next time. Go on, Kremlin.
Yo, guys, I got a question. Can you hear me?
Yeah, yes, I can hear you.
Yeah, sure. So, maybe it's a little bit slightly off topic, but I keep seeing this info about, like, even on Russian channels they're discussing about the planes and whatnot. And a couple of days ago, there's been this announcement of what's it called, a new batch of, I don't know. I don't understand how it can be new. A batch of MiG 31s delivered to the VKS. My question is, like, I know they don't produce those anymore.
It's
Like,
refurbishment, yes. So when
okay,
they
so it's
say new,
refurbished.
it's just refurbished and probably put to standard. And this is the one of the biggest problems that I always said for everyone was uh, crapping their pants about the two MiGs lost unnecessarily in Crimea. Um, if those are going to be the losses every year, it's not a problem. There are more than enough frames, and they produced more than enough frames. They mothballed more than enough frames. The issue is more than, despite the fact that the MiG 31 is such a huge beast, and there was this picture recently with them rocking four R-37Ms. There needs to be something to replace them on the same kind of category, but with modern uh, assets and modern capabilities, although they are completely relevant. Don't get me wrong. But the thing is that during the war is going to be more complicated because you need to serve what you have. But at some point, given the extreme utility of these planes, especially with their radar, especially with their capability to be fast, on point, deliver, and then go away, so almost untouchable by any kind of bullshit the Ukrainians can uh, muster uh, to shoot them down. Like for me, it's a no-brainer that they need to be to be reproduced, or something new needs to be done to replace them. But right now, this war literally showed that for the kind of war the Russians are fighting, the MiG-31 is such an on-point fighter, interceptor, and does everything: speed, size, capability. And given that we also know how the Patriot Pack 2, how fast it flies at its apogee, so basically 4,000 kilometers per hour, uh, it seems to me that at the range of engagement that the Su-34 was, the Patriot would probably never have had any kind of chance to catch the MiG-31, uh, purely on avoidance. I'm not saying maneuver or whatever, just like at 80 kilometers, by the time that the Patriot is up to a point of interception, the MiG is 20, 30 kilometers away, just by the fact that it's not going to lose its kinematics. Anyway, this is something else that probably would have to be done at
Yeah,
another point.
but just one thing, like from what I understood, like so basically they want to use these refurbished MiGs more like in what I understood is they want to use them like basically air to air combat. Like if they see any the
Yes.
Ukrainians like managing to get any F-16s in the air and try to pull some sneaky shit against the Su-34s with the Fabs, they're gonna put in the MiGers to basically shoot that shit down, even in slightly contested airspace.
Yes, because the thing with the MiG is, as I said, they can fully exploit the range of the R-37Ms with their radars. They got these huge ass radars and these very long range missiles, which means that the F-16, even if they're at the edge of the AMRAAM envelope, unless they got the D, which I do not believe, but even if they got the D, theoretically, they're going to be about 40 kilometers short against the MiG-31. So, in complete parity of circumstances, so even with AWACS, it will not matter because, as I said, you just don't have the range to touch the MiG-31. You have the range to maybe hit a Su-35S or a Su-34, especially as we know the Su-34, for some reason, had huge issues understanding if it was targeted or painted by the Patriot battery. But anyway, the point is that given the kinematics, the radar, the missiles that the MiG 31 BM carries, it's a no-brainer. Those guys are going to be probably 20 to 40 kilometers behind the Sus. The moment a blip happens, they lock, they launch. Su gets the fuck out before the AMRAAM comes, and the MiG is long gone. And have fun with it. But at the same time, uh, it's a bit of a pity that the whole air war over Ukraine is being more like avoiding to get shot. And most of the time, Ukrainians do not manage to avoid getting shot by air assets. Whereas the Russians have more problems with ground based defenses, mostly due to the fact that they ignore that Patriots were there, which is this is mind blowing, but it is what it is. So yeah, Kremlin, if it was enough for you, it's fine. If anyone wants to intervene, guys, it's up to you. Otherwise, it's gonna be enough for today. Thanks, Ben. Um, Guys, thank you very much for listening. It was just a pointer today. I didn't add much information because we, with a couple of guys at Teamwork Criminal, we're checking how it's going towards Torsk. If it goes the way we think it's going to go, so with this pocket being cleared and the Russians advancing towards Konstantinovka, then I'm going to make a thread with what I think is going to be the biggest challenge for Ukraine and how they're going to lose, I think, the war in Donetsk simply by having the Russians threaten Konstantinovka and having the Russians threaten Pokrovsk. And of course, it's going to be mostly a logistical route that would need to be completely rethought from the Ukrainians. And that rethinking means also a rerouting, which means longer and more exposed areas. And given the topography of uh, northwestern uh, northwestern Donetsk Oblast and southeastern Kharkov Oblast, there are a couple of things that probably are going to be complicated for Ukrainians to avoid. Notably, a couple of choke points. On top of the fact, as I said, there are going to be whole portions of that road that are in full defilade, and as we have seen, for the Russians, it's not a problem to find out when echelons from the Ukrainian side are coming towards the Kharkov region, which is, of course, a huge problem almost 2 years into this war that Ukrainians haven't been managing anything close to what the Russians are showing, which is between 90 and 150 kilometers of deep penetration from small reconnaissance drones on probably a daily basis. Yeah, Ali, it's up to you, man. Ali, I invited you. I don't know what happened. I invited you again, but apparently, for some reason, you cannot join. Oh, okay, disconnect. Well, guys, I hope he reconnects. Oh, fine. He's back. Up to you, Ali. Jesus. Okay, apparently Twitter does the usual bullshit. Okay, apparently Ali for some reason cannot join. I'm sorry. Ah, yes, I can hear you now. Fine. No.
Yeah, no, sorry, my phone like went dead for some reason. And I was just saying, I think I sent you before we talked about it about the possibility of they managed to actually build the air launched SM-6. That would be a problem, especially if it's like active radar. So I don't know if they would manage to do that, but I don't think they're that retarded to just send, say, F-16s with AMRAAMs against, MiG-31s armed with R-37 or something similar. But of course, then it's gonna if they're gonna launch it like 300 kilometers away, if they manage to do something similar, they're gonna need some like radar guidance because I don't think the SM6 radar or something similar is gonna be enough to do all the tracking. Like then they're gonna need an AWACS or maybe like a stronger radar for. I don't think the F-16 that they're gonna get is strong enough to keep painting the plane. So, but
But I agree with you 100%, and this is the why I think that's why I thought in the beginning that um, it had to be for a ground strike role because that's how they are stalling a large part of the Volchansk area assault, and also that's how they are stalling parts of the front down in Donetsk. If they want to send the SM6, the problem with that, and I'm gonna say something that I wanted to say later on, but the problem with that is that they will still need to work on how to adapt the SM-6, as you said, to be either self-guided, so basically you just point a GPS coordinate or you lob it into the general direction of the so-called target. But the problem is that the SM-6 is going to be picked up by anyone. A-50U, MiG-20, MiG-31. So that thing, ground radars and so on, that thing, in my opinion, if it goes really bad for the F-16, that thing's going to happen in a way or another. Even in the worst case scenario, if it gets the same beating that the Abrams is getting on the ground roll, maybe why not? They're going to do a kind of blitz just to have the Russians pipe down with their own jets. Therefore, the escalation ladder is going to go. And given that Trump is potentially the next president, we discussed with him, you never know. Apparently, given it shows in advance, probably they are not going to have enough time to escalate the war before Trump comes in. But you never know. I agree with you. If it's just the F-16s with the AMRAAM, be that the short C or the long D, it's going to be complicated for them if they want to use them as some kind of jack of all trades multi-tool. But once again, I really think it has more to do with the flyability of the Ukraine Air Force generally, and they're gonna do more of the same, just with American weapons instead of using the Su-24s with Storm Shadows or something else. On top of it, given that they have managed to arrange pylons for hammers on MiG-29s and Su-27s, they're probably going to apply the same to the F-16s. So it has more to do, in my opinion, more to do about the resource itself rather than what the resource brings on the table. A bit like the megaton of tanks that they had, most of them were Warpact era, with some upgrades, mostly when it came to the sights, thermal sights. But generally speaking, as I said, it's about um, just giving more rope to the Ukrainians to hang themselves with, while also bothering with Russians. Everything else, I do not see that they're seeking some qualitative jump over the Russians in such a mass that the Russians would think of going ham on them. Uh, and on top of it, as you said yourself, uh, the biggest problem with the F-16s would be hiding them. And we had all kind of theories. Masno came by saying, yeah, they're going to be put underground in Kiev. I'm like, he's the closest to the Russian border. He's the closest to Iskander. Makes no sense. And you don't even need to hit the underground facility. You just need to collapse the entrance of it, and no more F-16 for a couple of days. And every day you're gonna see them try to dig out the planes. You're gonna strike them at that point. So everything that's wrong with a hardened shelter, in my opinion, is gonna go even wronger with this kind of underground, uh, well in view storage for these planes. But for the rest, I agree with you. If it's just those F-16s, then it's just, as I said, more nuisance to the Russians, but not a game changer. And that tune is already on. A couple of guys, a couple of Americans are already saying that F-16 is going to have an impact, but it's not going to be a game changer, and it's just going to add more to the Russian cost. We will see if it's on the ground, on the sky. So up to you, Ali, if you have anything to add.
Yes, definitely.
Okay, guys, thank you very much. It was a bit of a uh, nothing burger today. Just to add my thoughts about how I was looking at the Ukrainian military evolving in this war. And for the rest, hopefully something more positive by the end of the month. When it comes to, as I point out, the three passages over the Vovcha River. If those are taken, the Russians have Jelani within 2 weeks. It would be probably the biggest achievement of this offensive on the Russian side, of course, except Avdivka. But thank you very much for listening. Have a nice day. Bye bye, guys.